This is chapter 6, Bones and Skeletal Tissue from your book. In this chapter, we're going to talk about cartilages that actually help in formation of bones later, as well as other cartilages that help to form your skeletal system. Further, we proceed with classification of bones, function of bones, and then the structure, anatomy part of the bone. This will be microscopic anatomy of the bone, and we will also talk about all the macroscopic parts and different names for different structures on the bone. Following that will be the bone development. Based on the different types of bones, there are two different types of bone development that we will be talking about in this chapter. Briefly introduce you to bone homeostasis, remodeling and repair. And under homeostasis imbalance, we will talk about definition of osteomalacia, rickets, osteoporosis, and Paget's disease. Remember, this is all going to be definition. We're not going to go into detail about each individual diseases. After that, we'll briefly stop at the developmental aspects of the bone and finish the chapter itself. Now, let's start with the skeletal cartilages. If you remember from your tissue chapter, skeletal cartilages has no blood vessels or nerves, and this is the reason why they take a longer time to heal compared to any other tissue in your body. Certain types of cartilages actually help in formation of the bone. We're first going to talk about the different types of cartilages. This is kind of like a review from your chapter 4. There are 3 different types of cartilages: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Each one has different matrix, different fibers, and their function also differs. This should be just a review. For this chapter, you should know where all these cartilages are located. For example, your hyaline cartilage are going to be found on the ends of your long bones and most abundantly found. The elastic cartilage example will be your earlobe, and your fibrocartilage will be all the major discs. That'll be your pubic symphysis and your intervertebral disc. There are 2 different types of cartilages that you have. One is the appositional and the other one is interstitial growth. The appositional is when you have the growth coming from the side. So if you have cartilage over here, the growth will start on this area like this. So the diameter is going to be increased if you have growth from the side, right? So that is appositional. That's what it says, external face of the existing cartilage. The interstitial is within. So the expanding is within, not from outside, but from within. After these cartilages grow in certain areas, these cartilages are going to undergo calcification. Calcification is a process where the matrix of the cartilage is now going to be deposited with calcium. As you remember, bone has calcium in its matrix as well. So this is basically how bone starts to form. This is when your normal bone growth happen, like it mentioned. And sometimes these cartilages, where they should not calcify in young age, calcifies as you get older. That is one of the reasons why older you get, you're going to have more issues with breathing, because the cartilages that are found in your rib cage are now calcified, so they don't give much as you breathe. So older people have trouble breathing. Calcification of intervertebral discs also is very common as you get older. So this basically tells you the growth of cartilage, different types of cartilages, and where the cartilages are found in your body. Examples. Now we're moving on to the bones. Bones are divided into 2 major systems: axial skeletal system and appendicular skeletal system. So if you look at this picture, right, all the orange ones that you see, so this will be the head region, the thoracic region, and the vertebral region. All these regions, the orange ones that you see over here, are under axial skeletal system. And the yellow one, that'll be your limbs, upper and lower limbs, and your basically the girdles that attaches your limbs. So that'll be your clavicle and your scapula. Hip bone over here. Those are the bones that attaches your lower limbs to your axial skeletal system. So those are all considered as appendicular skeletal system. So you can see over here axial is orange, yellow one is appendicular, and the girdles that attaches your appendicular to your axial are also considered as appendicular skeletal system. Okay, moving on from the different types of skeleton, we have different types of bones in our skeletal system. The classification of bones are, the first type we're going to talk about is classification of bones by shape. Our skeletal system is not one big cutout, right? We have different function for different types of bones. So because of that, we have different shapes of bones. We start off with the long bone. It's called long because it is long. Their length is bigger than the width, hence long bones. Short bones, these are cube-shaped bones found in your ankles, and certain areas like your patella, it's called a sesamoid bone. Flat bones like your skull, your sternum, those are all flat bones. They're thin, flat, and sometimes curved. And then irregular bones like your vertebrae, they're irregular in shape and hence they're complicated, hence they're irregular. So here you can see all the examples of all the different types of bones based on their shape. Then you have different types of bones based on the structure. We'll get to that later. But before that, let's talk about the function. Why do we need bones? Bones are there to support, okay? Support body, soft organs. Then protection. Protection against external environment for your soft internal organs. So that includes the brain, the spinal cord, your rib cage that protects your heart, your lungs, and all those things. Most vital organs are protected by your bones. Movement, because skeletal muscles are attached to the bones, when the skeletal muscle moves, the bones move along with it, hence the body moves along with it. Apart from that, another important function of your bones is going to be storage. What does it store? It stores minerals for you. It's a depot for calcium. Calcium, phosphorus are all being stored in your bone matrix. And then you have hollow areas where it holds bone marrows. So bone marrow is stored in your bones. Bone marrow is there for blood cell formation. When you get older, certain areas, certain bone marrows start to become fat. Okay, all the long bones that you have, like your femur, your humerus, all those long bones contains bone marrow. But as you get older, these bone marrows now become yellow bone marrow, which is nothing but fat, triglyceride storage in bone cavities. So this basically concludes all the functions of your bone. Now we're going to talk about the bony markings. This part has a lot of terminology, and the terminology are going to be important because the next chapter is based on these terminologies. Your bone is not a solid structure. It has holes in them, it has depression in them, it has bulges in them. It has to accompany whatever organ it is holding. It has to be functional for that organ. It can't be sealed off from the rest of the body. Reason why you have all these markings inside or outside your bones. Okay, so these names that are listed in your textbook or over here, you have to know the meanings of these names and as well as the spelling for these names, okay, these projections. The projections are sites for muscle and ligament attachment. That'll be your tuberosity, crest, trochanter, line, tubercle, epicondyle, spine processes. Names you have to remember as well as the definition for those names. Projections that help to form joints will be your head, facet, condyle, ramus. Okay, these are the projection that help to form different types of joints. Without joints, we will not be able to move. Hence, the bones have to provide us movement. So the structures on the bones have to be modified based on what kind of movement you're going to have in that particular joint. Apart from those markings that we mentioned, there are certain depressions and openings that you have in your bones that provide opening for your blood vessels, your nerves, and depressions to hold certain organs as well. So that'll include your groove, fissure, foramen, notch, meatus, sinus, and fossa. These are the names that you are going to encounter again and again in next chapter. So if your names, these name of the bony markings are weak in this chapter, you're going to have trouble in the next chapter. So I would suggest that you go over it, use flashcards if you need, and then revise them again and again. Moving on. Textures. This is the second type of classification I was talking about. Based on the bone texture, you have two types of bones in your body. One is the compact bone and the other one is the spongy cancellous bone. Compact bone is dense outer layer and spongy cancellous bone is inside a honeycomb structure that is kind of like a trabeculae, we call it as. Okay. The compact bone is the most strongest structure or bone that you have texture. It is there to bear weight. Whereas your spongy bone, which is a cancellous bone, is not meant to bear weight. Okay. What is it meant for? It is meant for holding bone marrow inside it. Just keep in mind that a single bone, like a femur, will have both textures, spongy and compact bone in the same thing. When we are talking about textures, I'm not talking just one particular type of bone that has only one type of texture. No, most bones that we're going to describe will have both textures in them. Now we're moving on to the gross anatomy of the bone itself. A long bone is a classic example. Now, if you look at this picture, you'll see that the topmost part and the bottommost part are called as epiphyses. The one that is closer to the joint attaching to the axial skeletal system is called as proximal. Okay, this is from your first chapter, actually, the names. So whenever you say proximal, it's closer to the point of attachment. That means your limb to your axial skeletal system. So proximal epiphysis closer to the point of attachment, distal epiphysis away from the point of attachment. In between that, you have this long area, which is diaphysis. Now, I usually give this example. When you eat chicken, when you munch on chicken bone or chicken wing, the tips of the bone seems to be softer, right? So that'll be your epiphysis, proximal and distal epiphysis. You can actually bite into it. But as you come closer to the center, this is the diaphysis. It usually splinters as you bite into it. It doesn't kind of chew well, right? So that is the diaphysis. Now, this actually also tells you two different textures of the bone. Here you have the soft bone, that's your spongy bone. You can see how it is honeycomb-like structure over here. And here you have the compact bone. That is the bone that bears weight, and that's the one that splinters. Epiphysis, extended end, spongy bone interior, epiphyseal line is the remnant of the growth plate. Now, if you look at this over here, that's the epiphyseal line. It used to be hyaline cartilage. When it used to be hyaline cartilage, while this bone has been growing, we call it as epiphyseal plate. Okay. As the hyaline cartilage multiplies over here, it moves upward and from the bottom, the matrix starts calcifying and starting to put down the new bones in this area. And that's how your bone starts to elongate. So epiphyseal line is only found in adults where they've stopped growing because this cartilage that used to be over here, hyaline cartilage, is now calcified, and we say that the growth plate has been closed. That means that person is not going to grow any longer. So here is your proximal epiphysis as covered with articular cartilage, which is also hyaline cartilage. This is the spongy bone area, epiphyseal line. This is an adult bone. And then followed by that is a diaphysis. Diaphysis has a hollow space in the center called as medullary cavity. This cavity is lined by endosteum. Each bone is covered outside by a layer called as periosteum. Endosteum is found inside, periosteum is found outside. Periosteum is a double layered membrane, and inside the medullary cavity is where you're going to see your bone marrow. This is yellow. That means this is a yellow bone marrow. Now, it is not functional, it just stores fat. Okay, that basically is your structure of your bone. Like I said, the periosteum has two layers: outer fibrous layer for protection, innermost layer which is osteogenic. Osteo means bone, genic means birth, new, right? It contains a lot of new cells: osteoblasts, osteoclasts, and osteogenic cells. Osteogenic cells are stem cells, pluripotent cells. Osteoclasts are bone destroying cells. Why do we have bone destroying cells? I'll come to it later. Osteoblasts, on the other hand, are bone forming cells. Please make sure that you keep your suffixes straight. The innermost layer is where actually all your nerve and your blood vessels pierces through and enters your bone. Remember, bone is a live tissue. These periosteal layers are attached to your bone by a structure called as Sharpey's fibers. Sharpey's fibers make sure that everything is kept in place. These white fuzzy thing that you're seeing over here in this picture, when we peel off the periosteum, is the Sharpey's fiber. And you can see how the blood vessel pierces these two layers and enters your bone itself. So here's a better picture. You can see how the blood vessel enter your bone. And here's the yellow bone marrow and endosteum. Endosteum also have osteogenic cells in them. And here are the white fibers that attaches your periosteum to the bone itself, called as perforating fibers or Sharpey's fibers. Structure of short, irregular, flat and flat bones. The long bones we talked about has pretty much the same structure. Sometimes it has two ends, distal and proximal epiphysis. Sometimes it doesn't. But these short, irregular, and flat bones do not have diaphysis in them because they're not long, right? So they're going to have periosteum just like a long bone. They're going to have inside endosteum just like a long bone, except they're having something else called as diploid in flat bones. Okay, we're going to talk about that. And within the spongy bone or honeycomb structure, you're going to have bone marrow, like I said. So what is this diploid that I said? You see over here, this is a cross section of a flat bone. That's your skull. You can see this outermost two layers. Okay, those are the two compact layers, and sandwiched between them is your spongy bone. So that's basically what they call it as diploid. The spongy bone is being sandwiched between two compact bones on the outer. Your bones cannot have just spongy bone, because then there will not be any kind of protection for the organs inside. Say, for example, your brain is over here, right? Your brain is over here. If the brain is over here, that means if it has only this spongy bone layer, then the brain has no protection, because spongy bone can be crumbled easily. Remember the chicken wing? You can chew on it very easily. So you need two layers of compact bone to protect it for the sandwich to happen. And that's basically what we call it as the spongy bone, called diploid in the flat bones. We talked about the bone marrow, and I kept saying there are two types of bone marrows in our body. One is the red bone marrow, and the other one is a yellow bone marrow, which is nothing but fat. The yellow bone marrow is found only in adults. All the long bones found in the medullary cavity of your long bones turn into yellow bone marrow. They are there only for storage of fat anymore as you get older. The red bone marrow is maintained in the spongy bones. Where are you going to see spongy bones? You're going to see red bone marrow, and red bone marrow is the only one that is capable of producing blood cells. When you are younger, it's another area. When you're a younger, all bone marrows are functional, all bone marrows are capable of producing blood cells. As you get older, your diaphysis, the bone marrow inside it, is now becomes yellow bone marrow. Microscopic anatomy of bone. When I was mentioning the periosteal layer, the osteogenic layer, I said there are three different types of cells. One was osteoblast, the other one osteoclast, and the third one was osteogenic cell. And I said osteoclast is a bone-eating cell, right? So we're going to talk about that over here. Let's start with the stem cells first. It's the osteoprogenitor, or also called as stem cells. Okay, these stem cells are found in the periosteum, and they are capable of becoming any type of cell in the bone. That means it can become osteoblasts or osteoclast if it wants, depending on the need in the body itself. Osteoblasts are bone forming cells, meaning they are going to make the matrix. Osteocytes are the mature bone cells. If you remember from your tissue, I said that the lacunae are formed around the cells, right, of the cartilage. Those are your chondrocytes. The same thing apply over here too. Okay. As the bone matrix is being formed around the osteoblast, they entrap themselves inside the lacunae, and now they are called as osteocytes. They are considered as mature bone cells, and they are there to maintain the matrix. They're not going to form new matrix, but they're going to maintain the matrix. That is a function of osteocytes. Osteoblasts, on the other hand, to form matrix. Now let's look at the next bone cell, which is osteoclasts. They break down, resorb bone matrix. Why do you need to break down bone? You need to break down bone so you can form new bone. As you're growing from younger to older adult, you have to remodel the bone. Say, for example, you're taking up a new sport, right? Based on what kind of effort is being put on the bone, what kind of muscle tension is being used on that particular bone, the bone starts to remodel accordingly, right? For remodeling, it has to remove the original shape of the bone and put in new shape over there. So for that purpose, you do need osteoclasts. And as well, based on your calcium, blood calcium level, you have to break down the bone. Remember, matrix has calcium depot in it, right? The bone matrix. Now, how are you going to get that calcium from the matrix? Only when you can break down the bone matrix, right? Resorb the bone matrix. That's exactly what osteoclasts do in your body. Okay, so they are also considered as a very important type of cell in your bone. As women get older, the estrogen goes down. The amount of resorption is imbalanced to the amount of new matrix put down. That's why they end up getting osteoporosis, which we will talk towards the end of the chapter. Here are the pictures of both the cells, osteocytes and osteoclasts. Now let's look at the microscopic anatomy of the bone itself. Before we start this, I'm going to talk about this picture right over here. This picture is actually 1/4 of the bone. So let me just draw over here. They think that it's a bone, and here's the medullary cavity. It's a cross section. So they have taken this piece right over here. That's basically the piece that you're seeing over here. Okay, so the rest kind of circles around. So you can see half of the portion right in this book. It's cut lengthwise. I've shown transverse section, and imagine if it goes lengthwise, and that's basically what you're seeing over here. Now this is a compact bone. This entire thing over here is your compact bone. Okay. Inside is lined by the spongy bone. The medullary cavity is lined by the spongy bone. Any compact bone, if you look at any compact bone, you're going to see the tree rings right over here. The tree rings. That's basically layman's term for structure, a complex structure called as osteons or Haversian system. You need to know both the names. The whole thing that I have marked over here is called as osteons of Haversian system. Each osteons and Haversian system has a canal in the center called as the central canal or Haversian canal. Okay, the canal goes straight down. So this basically that you're seeing over here is over here, over here, and over here are all the central canal, Haversian canal. Okay, so that's basically going straight down the length of the diaphysis. Remember, it is a compact bone, so we're long bone, so we're talking about diaphysis. If you take one osteon, you see the rings over here that I was saying, this one over here, one over here. This is actually tubes. Okay, there are tubes, one within each other, that together forms your osteon system or Haversian system. You can actually see the tubes in this picture, and inside over here is the canal, Haversian canal, through which your blood vessels, nerves, and all those things pass through. Okay. Because you have tube within tube within tube, this whole osteon is a reason why your compact bone is extremely strong, and this is the reason why you are able to bear weight on your long bones. Okay, osteon or Haversian system contains lamella. These tubes that you're seeing over here are lamellae. Okay, when you look at these lamellae, what you're going to see again, this is a bone, which is a connective tissue, meaning it has matrix, meaning it has fibers in the matrix. The types of fibers in the matrix are going to be collagen fiber. Another reason why your long bone gives so much strength is because not only because it has lamellae, tube within tube within tube, but also the collagen fibers that run in your matrix. Okay, so you can see over here that the collagen fiber is running in this direction, right? But over here it's running in this direction, and another one inside the lamella, it's running in this direction. So think about having crisscross like this, right? And then you have another one running over here. So you have the outermost layer running in this direction, running this middle layer running in this direction, and the innermost layer running in this direction. So that means you have fibers running in crisscross, which tends to give more strength to the osteons itself. Because remember, these are osteon, right? This is one osteon made up of lamellae. So this kind of gives that twisting force. Okay, crisscrossing of your collagen fiber gives the twisting force itself to your osteons. Okay, so the osteons again are made up of lamellae. They have your central canal or Haversian canal, the entire osteon also called as Haversian system. Where you do not have osteons in your long bones, in your compact bones, you do have lamellae right over here. These are also lamellae, except they are called as circumferential lamellae. This just provides strength, but not as much as the osteons itself. Now, I said the blood vessels run through the Haversian system, right? These blood vessels are connected to the neighboring osteons by a perpendicular canal. These perpendicular canal are called as Volkmann canal or perforating canal. So by this, any kind of hormones that are going in your blood not just stays in one osteon, but can be transmitted from one osteon to the other osteon. This is also called as a Volkmann canal right over here. So the blood vessels coming from the periosteum pierces the bone itself, enters the perforating canal, goes to your Haversian canal, and goes to the next osteon into the perforating canal after giving blood to the Haversian canal, and enters your medullary cavity, enters your spongy bone area. this medullary cavity of your long bone used to have red bone marrow, right, which later becomes fat. So that means if it was a red bone marrow, you need blood because that's where blood cells are formed. And this system that you have, the Haversian canal connecting to the perforating canal, entering the endosteal layer or medullary cavity, make sure that the blood is received to the red bone marrow inside. Now let's go back to the osteons. In each osteon, you see these kind of like thing found in each lamellae. Those are lacunae. This lacunae. One lacunae. Three lacunae. Here's a lacunae. These individual lacunae has a cell inside it, and the cell that is found inside these lacunae are called as osteocytes. These lacunae and these osteocytes are interconnected to the neighboring osteocytes through these fine hair-like canal over here that you see are called as canaliculi. So that means each osteocytes talk to other osteocytes. So if your body needs calcium, the other cells in the osteocytes are contacted and they stop making matrix. Instead, osteoclast starts working and breaking down the matrix, right? If you need calcium in your blood. And that's one of the reasons why you have these canaliculi in between the two osteocytes interconnecting, making sure that they talk with each other. Okay, so your microscopic anatomy, absolutely necessary. You need to know all the structures that I mentioned. Let's look at the microscopic structure of a spongy bone. Spongy bone are basically made of trabeculae. Trabeculae does not have osteons in them. So if you look at this whole thing over here are all trabeculae. You don't see tree ring-like structures. You don't see osteons in them. But that doesn't mean they do not have lamellae. They do have lamellae because you need certain kind of structure even in that. They do have lamellae, but they are irregularly arranged lamellae. They are not responsible for bearing weight. The reason they are there is so that they can have bone marrow in them. So there are a lot of capillaries in the endosteum and they supply nutrients to that area. There are no osteon. Trabeculae actually align along the lines of stress. Chemical composition. Because they are connective tissue, okay, what actually makes the bone differ from the cartilage? It's based on what is found in the matrix. Okay, the cells are going to be different from the cartilage. The cells that we already talked about are three types: osteogenic, osteoblasts, osteocytes, and we did osteoclasts. And we discussed the function of individual cells before. Now let's talk about the matrix. What actually gives that strength to your bone? Bone actually has ground substance just like your cartilage. So it has proteoglycans, it has glycoproteins, it has collagen fiber that gives the strength to the bone. The only thing that is different is the inorganic composition of the bone. Whatever we talked about before are considered as organic composition of the bone. Now we're talking about inorganic component that actually gives the extra strength and hardness to your bone. It's called as hydroxyapatites or mineral salts made of calcium phosphate crystals. This is responsible for the hardness resistance of your bone. 65% is made of this. And this is the reason why we call bone as a depot for calcium and phosphorus, because look at the crystals. It's calcium phosphate. Hence depot for calcium and phosphate. Okay. Now we're moving on to how the bone develops. When the baby is in the fetal stage, it's inside the womb. That means the bones cannot be fully calcified. It has to be something that is flexible, so it's easy for the baby to be born, and then eventually it gets calcified as the baby is growing. So that is absolutely important. You have the initial stage, bone formation. Second begins at the second month of the development of the fetus. Then you have the postnatal, after the baby is born, postnatal bone growth into early adulthood. The bone is starting to take shape of an adult bone. They're starting to calcify and to early adulthood. After adulthood, it's all about maintaining it, repairing it, and remodeling based on the needs of your body. These are the three stages that you have in your lifetime. You initially start with the bone formation, the fetal stage after the baby is born. It's a postnatal bone growth. And then entire adulthood is remodeling and repairing. There are two types of bone formation or ossification in your body. One that happens in the spongy bone and the other one that happens in the compact bone. Okay? The spongy bone is by intramembranous ossification, like your clavicles, the flat bones, cranial bones, undergo this kind of ossification method, intramembranous ossification. The other type of bones in your skeleton undergoes endochondral ossification, endo within, chondr cartilage, endochondral ossification. This requires hyaline cartilage. The previous one requires fibrous cartilage. The intramembranous ossification develops from the fibrous cartilage. The endochondral ossification develops from hyaline cartilage. The bone starts slowly replacing your hyaline cartilage in your endochondral ossification method. Let's start with the intramembranous ossification. This is what happens in your flat bones, like your clavicle, like your skull or sternum. All those are flat bones. First and foremost, you have the fibrous cartilage. So this blue stuff that you're seeing all around is fibrous cartilage. Somewhere in that fibrous cartilage, you start your blood vessels that are there start to bring in your pluripotent cells. Okay, so that is what this is. The pluripotent cell starts to become into osteoblasts. Osteoblast starts to form matrix. There is a center that is formed. It's called as ossification center. It has all the osteoblasts and these tiny ones. The matrix that is beginning to be formed are called as osteoids. This ossification center is covered by mesenchymal cells. Look at this. Mesenchymal cells are germ cells, right? From the fetal stage, there are three layers: mesoderm, ectoderm, endoderm, right? And your connective tissues are formed from mesenchymal cells, right? So that's basically what you're looking at over here, covered with collagen fibers and everything, right? These mesenchymal cells, because they're pluripotent, forms osteoblasts. So they form the initial center in your fibrous connective tissue membrane, okay? If you have ever have touched a newborn baby's skull, in certain areas they are soft, the soft spots we call them, right? Those are nothing but fibrous connective tissue. That is basically incomplete ossification. That is what you're seeing in the skulls of a newborn, right? Those soft spots are incomplete ossification. The pediatrician actually, they measure the soft spot and see if the growth of the baby is optimal or not. So that is exactly what we're discussing, how that soft spot becomes actual skull, right? So we start off, the whole skull is made of fibrous connective tissue initially, and in one area you have this ossification center. The mesenchymal cells around starts to become osteoblast. The osteoblast starts to form osteoids. That's the first stage. As the osteoblast starts to form matrix, some of them get strapped inside. The matrix are now calcified, and hence the cells, osteoblasts, become strapped inside, and they are no longer called as osteoblasts. Instead, they're called as osteocytes. So the space that you see over here around your osteocytes are called as lacunae. So as the matrix is calcifying in over here, your osteoblasts on the sides still starts to form osteoids. They secrete osteoids, and as it forms osteoid, they calcify and become your bone matrix. Now, the matrix has been laid down. As the matrix is being laid down, the blood vessels that are found around the matrix has to go around those blood vessels to form the bone matrix. When they go around the blood vessels to form the bony matrix, they leave these gaps. They have these honeycomb woven bone-like structure. Hence the spongy bone has that structure. Hence the trabeculae is being formed. So these blood vessels play an important role in that trabeculae formation of your spongy bone. Because the blood vessels are there, they are hindrance to the bone matrix formation, so they have to go around the blood vessels, and hence you have the honeycomb structure of your spongy bone. Okay. Meanwhile, the mesenchyme that is still found in the fibrous tissue around the bone that is being formed starts to compact. As they condense and compact, they now become periosteum. The outermost layer, remember, of the periosteum is the fibrous layer. The innermost is your osteogenic layer, contains pluripotent cell. Mesenchyme also is a pluripotent cell. And that's basically what you see in your periosteum. Now here's a good picture. You have osteoblasts in the innermost layer of your periosteum along with the other pluripotent cells. The matrix has been formed. The outside of the spongy bone now becomes compact bone because there are no blood vessels in there. So these become compact bone. The center diploid, the spongy bone, has the trabeculae because of the blood vessels running through them, and the matrix has to form around the blood vessels. Now they become the trabeculae. The outermost layer of the periosteum is your fibrous layer, and these blood vessels that you see inside the trabeculae later on become your red bone marrow. Hence, the spongy bone contains red bone marrow. Okay, this concludes the formation of intramembranous ossification process in your body. Okay, please go over the stages and we can continue now to the endochondral ossification. Before I said endochondral ossification is found in your long bones, okay, every other bone of your skeletal system other than the flat bone. Endochondral ossification happens with the help of hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage forms a model. Model first, and then they're broken down, and then bone is being formed. So this picture actually tells exactly what happens. When you are in the fetal stage, you end up in this. You start off with this. The entire long bone is basically hyaline cartilage. As a fetus gets older, you have your blood vessels, embryonic blood vessels, bringing in stem cells in this area. As they bring in stem cells, bone color is being formed on the sides because the primary ossification center is formed. This primary ossification center starts to eat up the existing hyaline cartilage in the center. As it starts to eating up, the whole system, the whole hyaline cartilage model becomes feeble. So the bone color actually supports the feeble cartilage model. Okay, so this primary ossification center, just like intramembranous ossification, brings in all your osteoblasts in this area. As the osteoblast is brought in and calcification takes place, the hyaline cartilage, which requires a different matrix, right? Not calcified matrix, a different matrix. The cell starts to die in the center. So you have deteriorating cartilage matrix. As it is deteriorating, the bone color strengthens the whole hyaline cartilage model itself. Okay, as it starts deteriorating, a cavity is formed in the center. Once a cavity is formed, the periosteal bud brings in the blood vessel into the deteriorating center. Now that is the initial formation of your medullary cavity. As the hyaline cartilage starts dying, it is slowly replaced by your bone. This is where your compact bone is being laid down. So diaphysis becomes longer as the cartilage is becoming longer. Remember, the cartilage is all over here and in this area. So both your epiphyses are going to have hyaline cartilage and they are developing. Okay, nothing is stopping from these two ends to grow. So as it is growing, The entire bone is growing. And in between, you have the compact bone starting to grow as well. So what happens over here is the bone growth is trying to catch up with the hyaline growth. That's basically what is happening in this area. Meanwhile, in your epiphyseal end of your long bone, you have more blood vessels entering and bringing in osteogenic cells. As more osteogenic cells are brought in, you have secondary ossification center in your epiphysis now. As the ossification center are formed in your epiphysis, spongy bone starts forming in your epiphysis, and there leaves a small line of hyaline cartilage. You see over here, the small area of hyaline cartilage is left. Remember, we still have to grow after we are born, right? We still have to catch up to that adult stage. So you need this little bit of hyaline cartilage to form as a model for your long bones to grow in length, right? So this area where you have the hyaline cartilage is what we call it as epiphyseal plate. As an individual reaches an adult size, this epiphyseal plate closes, meaning the bone catches up with the cartilage and it calcifies this area, and the cartilage is no longer located. That means the bone has reached its adult length and you stop growing. So it all depends on your puberty. How early you get your puberty determines how tall you become, especially for women. Women usually grow up till 16, 18 years, right? After that, they stop growing. The estrogen plays an important role in their tallness, in how tall the women or the girls grow. Once the estrogen level is high and the puberty is reached, this epiphyseal plate is closed. That means the length is fixed for that particular long bone. Please go over all the stages of your endochondral ossification. Postnatal bone growth. So it is not enough if you just are born. You have to get to the adult size. For that to happen, you need two things. You need interstitial growth and you need appositional growth. Remember, we talked about the same thing in cartilage as well. So if you take the interstitial growth, the growth is the length, okay, within the bone itself. So the growth is within and it grows in length. If you take the appositional growth, okay, the growth is from outside. Okay, so the girth of the bone is increased. Okay, the thickness of the bone is increased. This appositional bone growth you can see very much in when you work. So when you exercise more, you basically have the muscles that are on top of the bone puts in more pressure to the bone and the bone girth increases. That's the reason why they advise women after menopause to lift weights, because the muscle puts weight on the bone and the bone increases in girth. Increase in thickness, remodeling of all bones by osteoblasts and osteoclasts on the surface. Two types of bone growth. Let's look at how exactly the bone increase in your body. Now remember when I said that the epiphyseal end of your bone has the hyaline cartilage, and the hyaline cartilage helps to increase the length of your bone, right? So here's the epiphysis, here's the beginning of the diaphysis. Now they have taken this section of your hyaline cartilage and have shown over here, okay? So you're looking at the topmost layer over here and the bottommost layer over here, okay? So you're looking at the topmost over there and the bottommost over there. So the bottommost is closer to the bone. Okay, this will be the compact bone in this side, and this will be the spongy bone on this side. Okay, so this basically is what has been depicted in this area. So the topmost area, closer to the spongy bone or closer to your joint over here is the resting zone. Then comes the proliferation area. The proliferation area, the cells are dividing. You can see all the cells dividing over here. After the cells have divided, they have to become fatter, hence the hypertrophic zone. You can see the nucleus is larger than compared over here, more cytoplasm over here compared over here. The hypertrophic region now is getting closer to the bottom of the whole epiphyseal plate, right? The matrix starts to calcify in this zone. The calcification of matrix, you can see how the matrix from kind of lilac becomes pink over here. Okay, the matrix starts to calcify in this region, meaning now the cartilage cells cannot get any more nutrients because the matrix are not jelly-like as it should be in hyaline cartilage. Instead, they're calcified, more bone-like. Then the next layer is ossification layer. New bone starts to form. So it seems like as the cartilage is dividing this direction and moving this direction, the bone is trying to catch up in this direction. So the cartilage is going forward and the bone is catching up, trying to catch up with it behind, right? That's basically what is happening. This calcification zone becomes kind of like prone to fracture. Why? Because of the calcification, the cells in the cartilage cells are dead. They're starting to die. Because they're starting to die, the matrix begins to deteriorate and becomes more vulnerable for any kind of breakage, right? The ossification zone is where new bone starts to form. So as these bone formation, ossification zone is trying to catch up with the proliferation zone of your cartilage, the bone itself starts to elongate in nature. Okay, as the bone is trying to catch up with the cartilage, the bone itself now becomes longer and longer. How long does it try to catch up? Until you hit puberty. At puberty, this zone is being closed with the help of estrogen, testosterone, and everything. As this zone is being closed up with the help of estrogen and testosterone, the bone starts to catch up with the cartilage proliferation and it closes. That means the ossification zone catches up with the proliferation zone. No more proliferation will take place, and that stops the bone from growing long. That's why I said, depending on how early you hit the puberty, it determines how tall you become as an adult. If a child hits the puberty early, like in 9, that means the child is going to stop growing much earlier in life. Okay? You need to know all the layers of your epiphyseal plate: your proliferation, your hypertrophic, your calcification, and ossification zone. All right, hormones. Now here comes the hormonal influence. I keep saying as you hit puberty. What are the hormones? Estrogen and testosterone. Apart from that, you need growth hormone and thyroid hormone as well. Growth hormone stimulates the epiphyseal plate. That means as long as you have epiphyseal plate open and you give growth hormone, you can make that child grow longer and longer. Once that growth plate closed, no matter how much growth hormone you give, there is not going to be any making that child taller. The same thing with thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is necessary for you to grow along with the growth hormone. So if you don't have thyroid hormone and you just have growth hormone, you still end up being short. Okay? You need both for bone activity. Puberty. At puberty, you initially have a trigger. The testosterone and estrogen initially triggers the growth spurts, but they themselves inhibit or end the growth by closing the epiphyseal plate. By closing the proliferation zone, it closes the epiphyseal plate and ossifies the entire plate. Hence, you end growing. Okay, so testosterone and estrogen has 2 effects. First time, it promotes the growth spurts, and then later on, the same hormones in excess will end the growth. Now here's a picture of remodeling. Okay, over here you see two types of bones. Okay, so the first one, you see the bone in a certain structure, right, shape like this, right? So you have the bone structure like this. Say this, the person over here is taking up new exercise, okay, working on, right? So the muscle tends to remodel the existing bone. This is the existing bone. Now you can see the bone is growing in a different shape. So you can see from the original shape over here, right, in this red dotted line, the area has been removed with the help of osteoclast. Resorption of the bone matrix has taken place, and the formation of new bone has been laid with the help of osteoblasts. Okay, so this is remodeling. When does remodeling happen? It happens throughout your life, right? Like I said, you take up working out, any kind of new exercise at any point of your life, you end up having remodeling. Or say, for example, a child, a baby is born. The baby, when it is born, it's not walking, it's not moving, it's lying flat on its back, right? But then it slowly starts to crawl. Muscles are putting new effort on the bones. It slowly starts lifting up its head. Again, the same thing, right? So based on the movements, they're based on the muscle movements, the bone starts to remodel accordingly. So that means if you do not use your bones, or if you do not use your muscles, then the bone usually gets resorbed, because that basically that leads your body to think that, well, the bone is not being used, the muscle is not being used. That means the bone in that shape is unnecessary. Bone deposit. What all do you need for a strong matrix? Okay, you need a good diet. Good diet include protein. It includes all your minerals, your vitamins, and everything that are necessary to form your good bone matrix. That's exactly what you need for bone deposit. How does your bone resorption takes place? With the help of osteoclast, of course. So how does your osteoclast dissolve your bone matrix? With the help of a bunch of enzymes, lysosomal enzymes, bunch of acids that can dissolve your calcium phosphate crystals found in the bone matrix. So, and once it is dissolved, it is taken by the blood that is abundantly found in your bone into your blood circulation. Like I said, gravitational force, mechanical force, hormonal mechanism helps to remodel the bone. All these are absolutely necessary. We're going to briefly talk about hormonal control of blood calcium level. If your blood calcium is low or high, the bone matrix is being altered accordingly. Your blood calcium level is absolutely necessary for your muscle function, for your nerve impulse, for your blood clotting. So the blood calcium level is more important than the blood depot in your bone. So whenever your blood calcium level goes down, automatically your body takes calcium from your bones. It doesn't matter if your bones are fragile for your body, that is not important. The most important function is so that your muscles function, that includes your heart muscles, and your nerve impulse works, and blood clotting. So those are the absolutes. It takes precedence over a bone depot, right? The blood is continuously monitored by sensory nerve receptors found in your blood vessels. And if those calcium level has found to be low, it sends information to your brain. Remember, we talked about that receptor, control center, and effector. It sends information to your brain control center. From there, sends information to the effector. When your blood calcium levels are low in your blood, the effector is going to be parathyroid gland. The parathyroid gland releases a hormone called as parathormone or parathyroid hormone, which in turn goes to your bone. In the bone, they activate your osteoclast cells. and triggers the resorption of your matrix. And with the help of lysosomal enzymes and acids, the osteoclast dissolves the bone matrix. And the calcium salts from the bone matrix is dumped into the blood, rising the initial your calcium levels in the blood, hence depressing the initial stimuli. That's the initial stimuli was your blood calcium level being low in the blood. So that gets depressed. So this basically is a negative feedback mechanism from your chapter 1. Remember that. So parathyroid hormone acts on your bone only when you have low blood calcium level. What happens if you have high blood calcium level? Then another hormone acts. It's called as calcitonin. Calcitonin is produced by your thyroid cells called as parafollicular cells. They go and activate your osteoblasts. They have to reduce your calcium level in your blood. Calcium level is reduced when you make new matrix, right? Because to make new matrix, you need calcium salts. So the calcium salts are taken from the blood to form the new matrix, right? By the osteoblasts. So that's exactly what it does. By taking away the calcium salts from the blood, it reduces the calcium level in the blood. This is also a negative feedback mechanism. You need to know both the hormone, which cells these hormones act on, and how it affects the calcium levels in your blood. There's another hormone also that is found. It's called as leptin, secreted by adipose tissue, influences bone density by inhibiting osteoblasts. A scientist called as Wolf found out that based on how much demand you put on your bone, the bone grows or remodels accordingly. It's called as Wolf's. If you're right-handed, the bones on your upper limb on the right side become thicker and stronger compared to your left side, and vice versa. If you walk a certain way, the bones are going to get thicker in a certain area than the other area. Okay, that's basically what is called as Wolff's Law. Each bone takes a shape based on how the muscles that are attached to it acts on it. What kind of stress those muscles put on determines the shape of the bones. Hence, the structure and function goes hand in hand. Now we're entering the homeostatic imbalances. We're starting with the bone fractures. Bone fractures are of different types based on where the fracture takes place. Okay, so let's talk about the first one, displaced or non-displaced. So you have one part of the bone and you have the other part of the bone over here. Technically, the bone should be like this, continuous, right? With this. And the breakage has taken place, the fracture has taken place over here. If the original bone is shifted or the alignment has shifted, it's called as displaced, ends out of normal alignment. This is an example of an displaced. If basically the fracture that has been caused ends up at the same alignment, so it is continuous with this bone, retains its original shape, then this is non-displaced. Now let's look at this. We have one bone, one part of the bone here, the other part of the bone here. If the fracture that has occurred does not cut through and through, it's called as incomplete. Okay, it doesn't go all the way. If it goes all the way and cuts in two different parts, it's called as complete. So you have non-displaced, displaced based on the ends of the fracture, position of the ends of the fracture, if it is on normal alignment or out of normal alignment. If there is a complete break through and through, it's complete. If it is incomplete, it's incomplete. Okay. Then the orientation. Orientation, these are all classification of bone fractures, right? So let's take a bone right over here. If the bone cracks this way, okay, along the long axis of the bone, parallel to the long axis, it's called as linear. This will be linear, okay? If it goes perpendicular to the long axis, it's called transverse. Then the other type of classification we have is you have the skin. If the bone punctures the skin and the bone is protruding out of skin, it's called as compound. If the bone is retained within the skin hasn't been broken, then it is simple, closed. So you have two types based on what the axis of the fracture is. If it is along the long axis, it's linear. If it is perpendicular to the long axis of your bone, it's transverse. If the bone has broken and penetrated the skin, it is compound. If it is not and it's inside, it's simple. Let's discuss all the common fractures. Now, in this picture, you're seeing two different types of fracture. The first one is commutative fracture. You can see how there are many pieces of bone, 2, 3 more pieces of bone. This is because the bone has become brittle and it shatters, okay, very easily. Okay, when the force is being applied, it shatters. So it happens as you get older. The same is true of compression. The bone is porous, osteoporotic bone, most commonly in your vertebrae. The pressure that is put on the vertebrae causes the crushing of the bone over here. Okay, so that's compression. It can also happen in younger adults when they try to be too heroic and they jump off areas where they shouldn't be jumping. And the pressure that they put on the vertebrae is enough to crush their normal bone. They're not osteoporotic, but normal. They end up with compression fracture as well. The next one is very common among athletes. So this is the spiral fracture. So in this spiral fracture, what happens that when a person is trying to move in one direction, okay, the whole body is trying to move in one direction, but the bone is moving in another direction. So the bone starts to twist and they start to break, hence the spiral fracture right over here. Okay, you can see the spiral fracture. So this is basically what happens. The body is trying to move in one direction. The bone or the position of the bone is fixed in one area. Hence, it twists the bone and causing the spiral fracture. The epiphyseal fracture is very common among younger people, younger adults, where the epiphyseal plate has not closed yet. Remember I said the ossification zone where the matrix is dying, right? Or the calcification zone where the matrix is dying. So that is more prone to fracture, I said. So that exactly is what we're talking about here, epiphyseal fracture, where the cartilage cells are dying and calcification of the matrix is occurring. So at that time, when that child has some kind of trauma, it leads to epiphyseal fracture. Epiphysis separates from diaphysis. Now, in this picture, you see two different types of fracture. The first one is the depression fracture. So over here, you have a mallet. So this is a hammer, depression fracture, hit with a hammer, right? And it happens in flat bones mostly because there is an inward movement, right? The bone is fractured inward. That happens more common in trauma or in physical force has been exerted on that person, right? When someone punches somebody with like a hammer, right? All right, green stick fracture. Green stick fracture is found very common in younger people as well, very common in children because the matrix is not calcified enough. There is no more inorganic material in the bone. Inorganic material is that hydroxyapatite crystals, calcium phosphate crystals. They're not that much enough in the matrix. It basically causes this type of fracture. Okay, so think about you having a twig. Okay, you take a twig, a green twig, and you try to bend it. Okay, so it's not a dry twig, but it's a green one that you're trying to bend. Usually the fracture does not happen on this direction, so the bend force is this side. But the fracture does not happen in this area, but instead it happens over here, right? Because there is no dryness to the twig, the fracture happens in this area, not over here. So this usually is an incomplete, you can see it's an incomplete fracture that causes it. The shaft breaks only on one side and not on the other side where it bends. So it bends this side, but the fracture happens on the other side. So that's basically what you see in a green stick fracture. So you need to know all the different names, the pictures, and different types of fractures in this chapter. Now your fracture has happened. Let's look at how does it heal. Okay, so here's all the different stages for your bone to heal. Remember, bone is highly vascularized, highly nervous, so they heal pretty fast. Technically, the time that you're taking for the fracture to heal is relatively fast compared to the cartilage that you have. Let's look at this. The first stage is when you have broken the bone. This over here is a complete bone. Alignment is there, so it is non-displaced fracture. As soon as the bone is broken, the blood vessels that are running through the bone also breaks. Hence, you have blood accumulation. The periosteum hasn't broken, so you have accumulation going inside it, causing the hematoma. Heme means blood, oma means collection of something, right? So hematoma. Now the healing process starts. The healing process starts as soon as the bone fractures. So the blood vessels are formed newly. Okay, remember, for your bone to be formed, especially long bone, you need to have a model, right? You need to have a model. Over here, because it's a spongy bone inside, you have fibrous tissue and the cartilage being formed over here. So that's exactly what you see forming: internal callus, a fibrous and tissue and cartilage being formed. New blood vessels. Remember, your periosteum already has the osteogenic cells in there, right? So it's bringing in all the important cells for your fibrous tissue. Your fibroblasts and your chondroblasts are being brought in by your osteogenic cells, forming the internal callus. Okay, initial spongy bone formation begins. Bony callus is being formed from your internal callus. Bony callus is being formed, and because your blood vessels are already formed, the bone starts to form around it, hence the trabeculae starts to form again. And then the remodeling happens. Look at the bone that coming outside the original structure. Those bones are resorbed based on the muscle movement. That's why the doctors put the cast for certain amount, not prolonged time, because they want your muscles to act on that bone. After it forms the bony callus, it has to go remodeling process. The cast is removed, you start to put on weight, so your muscles start to act on that remodeled bone, and then it starts to take shape of your original bone that was there before the fracture. Okay, so this is basically how your bone starts to heal. Now we're moving on to the other homeostatic imbalances. I said we're just going to talk about the definitions: osteomalacia and rickets. This is when you do not have enough calcium deposits on the bone. Osteomalacia happens in an older adult. Rickets happens in a younger. So childhood disease is what we call it as rickets, due to vitamin D deficiency and dietary calcium deficiency. Osteoporosis is when the bone mass is lost, not the calcium deposit. The entire bone mass is lost. So the inorganic to organic ratio has been kept, but the bone mass is being lost. This is due to lack of estrogen, so postmenopausal women, calcium or vitamin D deficiency, immobility when you have casts for too long, or when you have immobility like stroke and other immobility or other disease. It can also be due to thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, when it is low. Remember, I said thyroid hormone is absolutely necessary for bone growth and remodeling. Diabetes also seem to have osteoporotic effect on the bones. So you can see the actual bone trabeculae. You can see how the bone matrix should be. And here is the osteoporotic bone. So this is brittle bone. You can easily crack open, shatter. Okay. Prevention, you take vitamin D, calcium. Remember, most menopausal women start taking in a lot of calcium tablets, that's not going to do you much good because your body tends to absorb only 500 mg of calcium per day. So it's not going to absorb more than necessary in your body. I would rather have the women working out with weight bearing exercise throughout their life. This actually builds the bone. Remember, more muscle stress you put on the bone, more osteoblasts are activated, meaning more bone matrix is being added. There are other hormonal replacement therapy that have been used. It's kind of iffy right now because they have found out that this contributes to cancer, breast cancer. The drugs that are there to increase bone mineral density hasn't had that much of positive effect from the people because of other issues, like Fosamax has been really dangerous. It causes unwanted increase in bone density in areas where you don't want, like your jawbone. So that hasn't been caught on either. The next type of homeostatic imbalance is your Paget's disease, where excessive haphazard bone formation, more of spongy bone formation rather than compact bone formation happens in these areas. So spongy to compact ratio is different. So this is not good for us because spongy bone does not carry weight. So if you have spine, pelvis, and femur having more spongy bone, that is going to cause fracture. So for that to stop, you give calcitonin and biphosphonate. Calcitonin increase bone matrix, meaning osteon formation. That's basically what is happening. We don't know the cause of Paget's disease. That concludes homeostatic imbalance. We're moving on to the last topic of the chapter, which is developmental aspects of the bone. When the baby in the fetal stage, most of the bones are actually hyaline models. As it starts growing closer to the birth, the bone starts to calcify in the diaphysis, but the epiphysis remains as hyaline cartilage. So here you can see it's an x-ray of the fetus. You can see how the bones over here, you can see it through the x-ray because the x-ray gets absorbed. You don't see it and you have this darker area. So this all are calcified. Look at the epiphyseal ends. The epiphyseal ends of the long bones, they are not seen because the x-rays pass right through them. Why do they pass right through them? Because they're hyaline cartilage. Okay, that's basically what you're seeing over here. As the baby grows, all the bones gets ossified. By age 25, nearly all bones are ossified. But after you grow older, by fourth decade, the bone mass starts to reduce. Of course, it is determined by how well you maintain your body. Do you work out more? How is your genetics? Did your mom get osteoporosis on the early age? How early did you attend your puberty also determines how good your bones are going to be maintained as you get older. All these factors play an important role in bone mass and how your bone mass decreases as you get older. So as you get older, towards 70, 80, the resorption rate predominates your bone formation rate. Hence, more bones become brittle, hence more bone fractures. So this concludes chapter 6.